There was a time when diesel engines were built so tough they could outlive their owners and their owners' kids. Before the Environmental Protection Agency transformed the diesel industry with increasingly strict emissions regulations, there were engines that ran over 1 million miles, roughly 20,000 hours, with nothing more than oil changes and basic maintenance. Today, I'm counting down 10 iconic diesel engines that were effectively banned by EPA emission standards. Engines that were engineered for a lifetime until government regulations forced manufacturers to prioritize clean air over bulletproof reliability.
In protecting our environment, enhancing the quality of life, and all these and more, we will and must press urgently forward.
Before we go into these mechanical legends, you need to understand what we lost when emissions regulations transformed the diesel industry. Prior to the late 1980s, diesel engines were purely mechanical marvels. No computers, no sensors, no DEF fluid, no particulate filters. The EPA's increasingly strict emission standards marked the beginning of the end for these legendary power plants. The result was a fundamental shift from user-serviceable reliability to dealer-dependent electronic maintenance nightmares. Starting our countdown at number 10, the Perkins 6354 represents everything that made British diesel engineering legendary before emissions regulations killed off the simple, reliable workhorses. This naturally aspirated inline six, designed in the late 1950s, displaced 354 cubic inches and became the backbone of agricultural and industrial equipment worldwide, powering everything from Massey Ferguson tractors to generators and forklifts across 6 continents. What made the 6354 special wasn't flashy technology or impressive power figures. It produced a modest 85 to 120 horsepower depending on the application. Instead, it was the engine's fundamental design philosophy that set it apart. Perkins engineers built this engine assuming it would run for decades with minimal maintenance in the harshest conditions imaginable. It also introduced direct fuel injection with a toroidal chamber in the piston crown, improving both power and fuel efficiency compared to previous models. The 6354 featured a wet sleeve design that made rebuild straightforward and economical. When cylinders wore out after thousands of hours, operators could replace the sleeves without removing the engine from the equipment. The mechanical fuel injection system was so simple that any competent mechanic could service it with basic tools, and the robust construction meant internal components operated well below their stress limits. Agricultural operators discovered that it could accumulate thousands of operating hours, sometimes exceeding 10,000 before requiring major overhauls. In industrial applications, these engines powered generators and equipment in remote locations where dealer service wasn't available, earning a reputation for starting reliably even after sitting unused for months. But when EPA tier regulations began tightening in the 1990s and 2000s, Perkins faced a choice: invest millions in updating the 6354 for emissions compliance, or focus resources on newer engine designs. The company chose the latter, and the 6354 was gradually phased out from the U.S. market through the 1990s, although it continues to run in other regions with less stringent emissions regulations. The Ford 6-liter Powerstroke, built by International Harvester as the VT365, represents one of the most cautionary tales in diesel emissions compliance. When Ford needed to replace the beloved 7.3-liter Powerstroke to meet 2003 emission standards, they turned to International for a solution that would prove to be an expensive mistake. International's approach to emissions compliance was to rely heavily on exhaust gas recirculation, or EGR, rather than investing in more comprehensive after-treatment systems. The VT365 featured a sophisticated EGR system that recirculated exhaust gases back into the combustion chambers to reduce nitrogen oxide formation. On paper, this seemed like an elegant solution that would maintain the mechanical simplicity that diesel owners valued. In practice, the 6-liter became one of the most problematic diesel engines ever installed in pickup trucks. The EGR system created a cascade of reliability issues that plagued owners throughout the engine's production run from 2003 to 2007. Exhaust gas recirculation introduced soot and moisture into the intake system, leading to carbon buildup that clogged intake manifolds and EGR coolers. The EGR cooler itself became a notorious failure point. These heat exchangers were designed to cool exhaust gases before mixing them with fresh air, but they frequently developed leaks that allowed coolant to enter the combustion chambers. When EGR coolers failed, they often took head gaskets with them, creating expensive repair bills that sometimes exceeded the truck's value. Turbocharger failures were equally common, often caused by oil contamination from the problematic EGR system. The variable geometry turbocharger was sensitive to carbon buildup, and when it failed, replacement costs were substantial. Ford issued numerous technical service bulletins and recalls, but the fundamental design issues were never fully resolved. The 6-liter's problems became so widespread that it spawned an entire aftermarket industry focused on bulletproofing these engines by replacing or eliminating problematic emissions components. Many owners discovered that removing EGR systems dramatically improved reliability, but doing so violated federal emissions regulations. The Detroit Diesel Series 50 proved that good things sometimes come in small packages, but even the best designs can't survive regulatory obsolescence. This inline-4 diesel displaced just 8.5 liters but punched well above its weight class in city buses and medium-duty commercial trucks throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Unlike Detroit's famous 2-stroke engines, the Series 50 was a conventional 4-stroke design that incorporated advanced electronic controls and fuel injection technology. The engine featured Detroit's D-Deck electronic control system, which provided precise fuel delivery and diagnostic capabilities that were revolutionary for their time. What made the Series 50 remarkable was its power density and fuel efficiency. Despite its relatively small displacement, the engine could produce up to 350 horsepower and 1,150 pound-foot of torque, making it competitive with much larger engines in urban delivery and transit applications. The electronic controls allowed for multiple power ratings from the same basic engine, giving fleet operators flexibility and matching power to specific applications. Transit agencies particularly appreciated the Series 50's smooth operation and reduced noise levels compared to larger engines. In stop-and-go city driving, the engine's responsive throttle and strong low-end torque made it ideal for buses that needed to accelerate quickly from frequent stops. However, when EPA 2007 emission standards arrived,
last month the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA must take action under the Clean Air Act regarding greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles.
Requiring diesel particulate filters and selective catalytic reduction systems, Detroit Diesel faced a difficult decision. The Series 50's relatively small market share and specialized applications made it economically unfeasible to develop the complex after-treatment systems required for compliance. Rather than invest millions in updating an engine with limited market potential, Detroit Diesel chose to discontinue the Series 50 and focus resources on their larger, higher-volume engines. The decision left transit agencies and fleet operators scrambling to find suitable replacements, many of which were larger, heavier, and less fuel-efficient than the compact Series 50. The Cummins 903 V8 embodied the philosophy that there's no replacement for displacement, delivering massive torque and legendary durability in applications where failure wasn't an option. This 903 cubic inch V8 was built like a fortress, with components so robust that many considered it borderline overbuilt for its intended applications. Military applications were where the 903 truly shined. The engine powered heavy tactical trucks, construction equipment, and marine vessels that needed to operate reliably in extreme conditions. The 903's mechanical fuel injection system, and robust construction made it ideal for military use where electronic complexity could be a liability in combat situations. The engine's design reflected Cummins' heavy-duty heritage, featuring a deep skirt block with massive main bearings and a forged steel crankshaft designed for continuous high-load operation. The wet sleeve design allowed for straightforward rebuilds, and the mechanical simplicity meant that field repairs were possible with basic tools and spare parts. Agricultural applications also benefited from its massive torque output and reliability. Large tractors and combines equipped with these engines could handle the heaviest field work without strain. And the engine's tolerance for less than perfect maintenance made it popular with farmers who needed equipment that would keep running, despite occasional neglect. However, the 903's size and mechanical design made it incompatible with modern emissions requirements. The engine's large displacement and relatively simple combustion system produced emissions levels that couldn't be reduced to acceptable levels without fundamental redesign. Unlike smaller engines where after-treatment systems could compensate for higher raw emissions, the 903's output was simply too high for practical cleanup. When EPA regulations tightened in the 2000s, Cummins made the strategic decision to focus development resources on engines with broader market appeal. The 903's specialized applications and relatively low production volumes couldn't justify the massive investment required for emissions compliance. And the engine quietly faded from mainstream service. The Detroit Diesel 6 V71 represents the ultimate expression of two-stroke diesel technology, before emissions regulations ended the era of screaming jimmies. This V6 powerhouse combined the raw power of Detroit's two-stroke design with a size that made it practical for medium-duty applications, creating an engine that was nearly indestructible when properly maintained. Its two-stroke design meant it fired on every stroke rather than every other stroke, like conventional four-stroke engines. This fundamental difference gave the engine twice the power pulses of equivalent four-stroke designs, resulting in exceptional power density and the distinctive exhaust note that became synonymous with American trucking. What made the 6 V71 legendary was its mechanical simplicity combined with robust construction. The engine used unit injectors, one per cylinder, that combined the injection pump and nozzle in a single serviceable unit. Each injector could be individually timed and adjusted, and replacement required no special tools or electronic programming. The supercharger system was integral to two-stroke operation, but mechanically simple and reliable. The roots blower was gear-driven from the engine's timing gears, forcing fresh air through intake ports in the cylinder walls while scavenging exhaust gases. This system was so dependable that supercharger failures were rare, and when they did occur, replacement was straightforward. Fleet operators discovered that 6 V71 engines could handle continuous, high-load operation that would destroy lesser engines. The two-stroke design was inherently suited to constant speed applications like generators and marine propulsion, where the engine might run at full load for thousands of hours without shutdown. But the 6 V71's two-stroke design became its downfall when emissions regulations tightened. The engine's scavenging process meant that some fuel inevitably passed through unburned, creating visible smoke that became unacceptable under EPA standards. The distinctive blue haze that followed those vehicles was a trademark of the design, but it represented unburned hydrocarbons that violated emissions limits. Unlike four-stroke engines where after-treatment systems could reduce emissions, the 6 V71's fundamental operating principles made it impossible to achieve compliance without destroying the characteristics that made it special. Detroit Diesel eventually discontinued the entire two-stroke line, marking the end of an era in American diesel history. The Cummins N14 represented the sweet spot of 1990s highway diesel technology, delivering the raw torque and mechanical reliability that made it a favorite among owner-operators and fleet managers alike. This 855 cubic inch inline six was the evolution of Cummins' legendary NTC series, incorporating lessons learned from decades of over-the-road service. What made the early N14 special was its balance of power and simplicity. The mechanical versions used Cummins' proven PT fuel system, which maintained constant fuel pressure with individual injectors controlling delivery to each cylinder. No electronic controls, no sensors, no computers, just mechanical precision that any diesel mechanic could understand and repair. The N14's robust construction reflected Cummins' understanding of long-haul trucking demands. The engine featured a deep skirt block with 7 main bearings, supporting a forged steel crankshaft designed for continuous operation under load. The wet liner design made rebuilds economical, and many N14 blocks accumulated over 1 million miles through multiple overhauls. Owner-operators particularly appreciated the N14's fuel efficiency and reliability. The engine could maintain highway speeds with heavy loads while delivering respectable fuel economy, and its mechanical simplicity meant that repairs could be performed at independent shops rather than expensive dealer service centers. The early electronic select versions attempted to bridge the gap between mechanical reliability and emissions compliance, but they represented a compromise that satisfied neither goal completely. While Select provided better fuel control and diagnostic capabilities, it also introduced electronic complexity that many operators viewed with suspicion. When EPA 1998 emissions standards arrived, requiring more sophisticated emissions control systems, the N14's fundamental design couldn't adapt. The engine's mechanical fuel system and relatively simple combustion chamber design produced emissions levels that required extensive aftertreatment to achieve compliance. Cummins made the difficult decision to discontinue the N14 and focus development resources on the ISX series, which featured more advanced combustion technology and electronic controls designed from the ground up for emissions compliance. The transition marked the end of an era when diesel engines could be both powerful and mechanically simple. The Caterpillar C15 ACERT represents one of the most ambitious attempts to achieve emissions compliance through advanced combustion technology, and its ultimate failure demonstrates the challenges manufacturers faced in the transition to clean diesel. CAT's advanced combustion emission reduction technology was supposed to reduce emissions through precise control of the combustion process rather than relying heavily on after-treatment systems. ACERT technology incorporated multiple fuel injections per combustion cycle, variable valve timing, and sophisticated electronic controls to optimize combustion for both power and emissions. The system was incredibly complex, using up to 7 fuel injections per Powerstroke to control combustion temperature and pressure throughout the cycle. On paper, ACERT seemed like an elegant solution that would maintain Caterpillar's reputation for durability while meeting emissions requirements. The technology promised to reduce nitrogen oxides and particulate matter through combustion optimization, potentially avoiding the reliability issues associated with exhaust after-treatment systems. In practice, the C15 ACERT became notorious for heat-related problems and poor fuel economy. The multiple injection strategy and precise timing requirements generated excessive heat that stressed engine components and cooling systems. Many operators reported cooling system failures, head gasket problems, and premature wear of fuel system components. The ACERT system's complexity also created diagnostic challenges that frustrated technicians and operators. When problems occurred, troubleshooting required specialized equipment and extensive knowledge of the system's operation. Independent repair shops often struggled to properly diagnose and repair ACERT-related issues. Fuel economy was another major disappointment. Despite CAT's promises of improved efficiency, many operators found that C15 ACERT engines consumed more fuel than their predecessors while delivering similar or reduced power output. The complex injection strategies that were supposed to optimize combustion often resulted in incomplete fuel burning and reduced thermal efficiency. When EPA 2007 standards arrived, requiring diesel particulate filters and selective catalytic reduction systems, Caterpillar faced the reality that ACERT technology alone couldn't achieve compliance. Rather than invest in developing aftertreatment systems for on-highway applications, CAT made the strategic decision to exit the on-road engine market entirely, focusing instead on off-highway and marine applications where they maintained competitive advantages. The Navistar MaxxForce engines represent one of the biggest gambles in diesel engine history and one of the most spectacular failures. When EPA 2010 emission standards required dramatic reductions in nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, most manufacturers adopted selective catalytic reduction systems using diesel exhaust fluid. Navistar chose a different path, betting everything on an EGR-only approach that would prove disastrous. Navistar's strategy was based on the belief that customers would reject DEF systems due to their complexity and operating costs. The company's engineers were convinced they could achieve EPA 2010 compliance using advanced exhaust gas recirculation technology without the need for SCR systems or diesel exhaust fluid. The MaxxForce 7, a 6.4-liter V8, and the MaxxForce DT, a 9.3-liter inline-six, incorporated sophisticated EGR systems that recirculated up to 40% of exhaust gases back into the combustion chambers. This massive recirculation rate was necessary to reduce combustion temperatures enough to limit nitrogen oxide formation. The problems began almost immediately. The extreme EGR rates created severe carbon buildup throughout the intake system, clogging EGR coolers, intake manifolds, and valves. EGR cooler failures became epidemic, often occurring within the first 100,000 miles of service. When these heat exchangers failed, they typically dumped coolant into combustion chambers, causing catastrophic engine damage. Fleet operators began experiencing failure rates that were unprecedented in the commercial vehicle industry. Some fleets reported that MaxxForce engines required major repairs or replacement within 200,000 miles, a fraction of the service life expected from commercial diesel engines. By 2012, Navistar was forced to abandon the EGR-only strategy and begin installing SCR systems. The company paid hundreds of millions in settlements and lost significant market share to competitors whose SCR-equipped engines proved far more reliable. The Detroit Diesel 8V92 deserves recognition as the ultimate expression of two-stroke diesel technology before emissions regulations ended the era of screaming Jimmies forever. This 8-cylinder powerhouse combined the raw power of Detroit's two-stroke design with the reliability that made Detroit diesel engines legendary in heavy-duty applications worldwide. The 8V92's design philosophy reflected Detroit Diesel's commitment to mechanical simplicity and serviceability. The engine featured unit injectors, one per cylinder, that combined the injection pump and nozzle in a single serviceable unit. Each injector could be individually timed and adjusted, and replacement required no special tools or electronic programming. What made this engine legendary was its power output combined with durability. The engine produced 318 horsepower from 568 cubic inches through the efficiency of two-stroke operation. Every stroke was a power stroke, creating the distinctive exhaust note that became synonymous with Detroit diesels. The supercharger system was integral to two-stroke operation, but mechanically simple and reliable. The roots blower was gear-driven from the engine's timing gears, forcing fresh air through intake ports while scavenging exhaust gases. Fleet operators discovered that 8V92 engines could handle continuous high-load operation that would destroy lesser engines. In trucking applications, the engine could maintain highway speeds with heavy loads while delivering exceptional reliability, but the 8V92's two-stroke design became its downfall when emissions regulations tightened. The engine's scavenging process meant some fuel inevitably passed through unburned, creating visible smoke that violated EPA standards. Unlike four-stroke engines where aftertreatment systems could reduce emissions, the 8V92's fundamental operating principles made compliance impossible without destroying what made it special. At the top of our list sits the Caterpillar 3406E, the engine that represents the absolute pinnacle of pre-emissions diesel technology. This 893 cubic inch inline-six achieved the perfect balance between mechanical reliability and early electronic sophistication, creating what many consider the greatest highway diesel engine ever built. The 3406E represented the final evolution of Caterpillar's mechanical diesel heritage before emissions regulations forced the industry toward complexity. The engine combined decades of CAT's heavy equipment experience with electronic controls that enhanced performance without sacrificing the mechanical robustness that made Caterpillar engines legendary. What made the 3406E special was its fundamental design philosophy. Caterpillar engineers built this engine assuming it would be rebuilt multiple times over its service life, with components designed for easy replacement rather than planned obsolescence. The deep skirt block featured 7 main bearings and massive head bolts that created a combustion chamber seal, capable of withstanding extreme pressures. The 3406E's fuel system represented the ultimate development of mechanical injection technology, enhanced by early electronics. The Peak system provided precise fuel delivery timing while maintaining the mechanical reliability that operators demanded. Unlike later engines that relied entirely on electronic controls, the 3406E could still run even if electronic systems failed. Power output was impressive for its era, with the 3406E producing up to 425 horsepower and 16 pound-foot of torque. Owner-operators particularly loved the engine's combination of power and fuel economy, and the mechanical robustness meant that high-mileage rebuilds were economical, with many engines accumulating over 1 million miles before requiring major overhauls. But when EPA 2003 emission standards arrived, the 3406E's fundamental design couldn't adapt to the new requirements. Rather than compromise the engine's legendary reliability with complex emission systems, Caterpillar chose to discontinue the 3406E. Nothing that followed ever quite captured its perfect balance of performance, reliability, and serviceability.